Charles Barkley was on Bill Simmons' podcast this week, and they got into a conversation about the second apron. And Bill Simmons basically said, hey, the second apron is making it harder for teams to keep players together. And Charles Barkley is in favor of the second apron. And he said, all these players don't want to compete today. And I'm just like, that is the biggest misconception of why players leave teams for better situations. A lot of the times, players leave teams because the organizations are poorly ran. And in that same interview, Charles Barkley goes over his frustrations 39 years ago with the 76ers about how they traded the number one pick in the draft for a bunch of guys that weren't playing and traded away Hall of Famer, legendary player Moses Malone during his time in Philly. And it just goes to show you that even he wanted out of that situation because it was a poorly ran situation. Despite guys like, and even in that same interview, he said nobody was going to come to Philly to play with me. And it's like, okay, so how can you see it from that perspective and then look at the other places like LeBron, Kevin Durant, other guys like that who left for better situations? LeBron was winning 60 games a year in Cleveland, winning MVPs in Cleveland, and only got to the finals once and was getting played with old Shaq, Antoine Jameson, the Mo Williams of the world, respectable in their own right, but guys that weren't helping him go up against KG, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, Rajon Rondo, who was coming up, Kendrick Perkins, who was enforcing an offensive rebound, the Orlando Magic, who had Dwight Howard and Hedo Turkoglu, Rashad Lewis, and Jameer Nelson. Like, yeah, LeBron is probably the best player out of all those guys, but what we saw were those teams were fundamentally better, built correctly, had bench depth, were better. A lot of guys leave situations because these organizations are not bringing in help, even as recently with Jimmy Butler. As we saw with him just saying, hey, I just need some help here, bring somebody in. They were tied to Damian Lillard for, the past 2-3 years and didn't get him. And it's just like, okay, what am I doing here if you're not going to at least try to help me win in these situations? And that's the thing I think gets lost in today's era. Our players are holding these organizations accountable because they're not doing a good job. That is the main thing. And yes, maybe it's injury shot in the foot, especially with the Kevin Durant situation, especially when he went to Brooklyn and then Phoenix. But overall, while he left OKC, people forget they weren't bringing in anybody. The style of play wasn't working. The players weren't working. They were bringing in lame duck coaches. He left. Did he go to, I didn't want him to go to Golden State. I don't think anybody did, but he wanted a little bit more modernization in their offense, and that's why he left. And people keep blaming Russell Westbrook. I'm like, there's a lot more behind the scenes that people don't talk about, which people who detail, and there's articles out there that detail what actually happened. But a lot of the times, these organizations shoot themselves in the foot, and that's why players leave. It's not because the city isn't nice, XYZ, and all this other stuff. Players leave because these organizations are doing dumb shit. That's why.